A Voice from Waterloo is the humble tale of an old soldier who was an eyewitness to, and participant in, many of the scenes he attempts to describe. Edward Cotton served in the 7th Hussars. The battle is about to begin. Let's begin. Our bivouac was quiet during the night, except that the arrival of cavalry and artillery caused occasional movement. About 2 o'clock in the morning, a cavalry patrol got between the pickets, and a rattling fire of musketry began, which brought some of our generals to the spot. Picton was the first to arrive, and it was found that no attempt to advance had been made, and all was soon quiet again. The stillness of the enemy quite surprised his grace, and drew the remark, "They are possibly retreating." The Duke, who had slept at Genappe, was early at Quatre Bras. Up to this time, we had no satisfactory intelligence of the Prussians. His Grace consequently sent a patrol along the Namur road to gain intelligence. Captain Gray's troop of the 10th Hussars was sent on this duty, accompanied by Lieutenant Colonel the Honourable Sir Alexander Gordon, one of the Duke's aides-de-camp. Shortly afterward, Captain Wood, of the 10th, who had been patrolling, informed the Duke that the Prussians had retreated. Gordon's patrol discovered, on the right of the road, some of the enemy's vedette and a picket. They fell back hurriedly before the patrol, who turned off the high road to their left, about 5 miles from Quatre Bras, and about an hour afterward came up with the Prussian rear. After obtaining the required information, the patrol returned to headquarters at Quatre Bras, where they arrived about 7 o'clock a.m., reporting that the Prussians were retreating upon Wavre. The Duke immediately issued the following orders. To General Lord Hill, GCB. Quatre Bras, 17th of June, 1815. The 2nd Division of British Infantry, to march from Nivelles on Waterloo, at 10 o'clock. The brigades of the 4th Division, now at Nivelles, to march from that place on Waterloo, at 10 o'clock. Those brigades of the 4th Division at Braine-le-Comte, and on the road from Braine-le-Comte to Nivelles, to collect and halt at Braine-le-Comte this day. All the baggage on the road from Braine-le-Comte to Nivelles, to return immediately to Braine-le-Comte, and to proceed immediately from thence to Halle and Brussels. The spare musket ammunition to be immediately parked behind Genappe. The corps under the command of Prince Frederick of Orange will move from Enghien this evening, and take up a position in front of Halle, occupying Braine-le-Château with 2 battalions. Colonel Erstorff will fall back with his brigade on Halle, and place himself under the orders of Prince Frederick. An officer from the Prussian headquarters, bearing dispatches, written, no doubt, in secret characters, or the French would have immediately discovered the direction in which the Prussians retreated, had been waylaid and made prisoner in the night. But a second officer afterward arrived at our headquarters and confirmed Colonel Gordon's statement that the Prussians had fallen back upon Wavre. The Duke immediately wrote to Blucher, informing him of his intention to retreat upon the position in front of Waterloo, and proposing to accept battle on the following day, provided the Prince would support him with 2 corps of his army. The first hint to Picton of the Duke's intention to retreat was an order conveyed to him, to collect his wounded, when he growled out, "Very well, sir," in a tone that showed his reluctance to quit the ground his troops had so bravely maintained the day before. The Duke commenced the retrograde movement, masked as much as possible from the enemy, who followed us with a large force of cavalry, shouting, "Vive l'Empereur!" The first part of the day, the 17th, was sultry, with not a breath of air to be felt, and the sky covered with dark heavy clouds. Shortly after the guns came into play, it began to thunder, lighten, and rain in torrents. The ground very quickly became so soaked, that it was difficult for the cavalry to move, except on the paved road. This, in some measure, checked the advance of the French cavalry, who pressed us very much. The regiment to which I belonged covered the retreat of the main columns. As we neared Genappe, our right squadron, under Major Hodge, was skirmishing. By this time the ploughed fields were so completely saturated with rain, that the horses sunk up to the knees, and at times nearly up to the girths, which made this part of the service very severe. Our other 2 squadrons cleared the town of Genappe, and formed on the rising ground on the Brussels side. Shortly after, the right squadron retired through the town, and drew up on the high road in column, when a few straggling French lancers, half tipsy, came up and dashed into the head of the column. Some were cut down, and some made prisoners. The head of the French column now appeared debouching from the town, and Lord Uxbridge being present, he ordered the 7th Hussars to charge. The charge was gallantly led by the officers and followed by the men, who cut aside the lances and did all in their power to break the enemy, but our horses being jaded by skirmishing on heavy ground, and the enemy being chiefly lancers, backed by cuirassiers, they were rather awkward customers to deal with, particularly so, as it was an arm with which we were quite unacquainted. When our charge first commenced, their lances were erect, but upon our coming within 2 or 3 horses' length of them, they lowered the points and waved the flags, which made some of our horses shy. Lord Uxbridge, seeing we could make no impression on them, ordered us about. We retired, pursued by the lancers and the cuirassiers intermixed. We rode away from them, reformed, and again attacked them, but with little more effect than at first. Upon this, Lord Uxbridge brought forward the 1st Life Guards, who made a splendid charge, and drove the cuirassiers and lancers pell-mell back into Genappe. The Life Guards, charging downhill, with their weight of men and horses, literally rode the enemy down, cutting and thrusting at them as they were falling. In this affair my old regiment had to experience the loss of Major Hodge and Lieutenant Meyer, killed, Captain Elphinstone, Lieutenant Gordon, and Peters, wounded, and 42 men, with 37 horses, killed and wounded. We were well nigh getting a bad name into the bargain. Reports, as false as they were invidious, having been propagated by some secret enemy of the 7th Hussars, it may not be uninteresting to the military world to be made acquainted with the opinion of their colonel, the Marquis of Anglesey, as conveyed in the following letter. Brussels, 28th of June 1815. My dear brother officers. It has been stated to me, that a report injurious to the reputation of our regiment has gone abroad, and I do not therefore lose an instant in addressing you on the subject. The report must take its origin from the affair which took place with the advance guard of the French cavalry, near Genappe, on the 17th inst., when I ordered the 7th to cover the retreat. As I was with you and saw the conduct of every individual, there is no one more capable of speaking to the fact than I am. As the lancers pressed us hard, I ordered you, upon a principle I ever did, and shall act upon, not to wait to be attacked, but to fall upon them. The attack was most gallantly led by the officers, but it failed. It failed because the lancers stood firm, had their flanks completely secured, and were backed by a large mass of cavalry. The regiment was repulsed, but it did not run away, no, it rallied immediately. I renewed the attack, it again failed, from the same cause. It retired in perfect order, although it had sustained so severe a loss, but you had thrown the lancers into disorder, who being in motion, I then made an attack upon them with the 1st Life Guards, who certainly made a very handsome charge, and completely succeeded. This is the plain honest truth. However lightly I think of lancers under ordinary circumstances, I think, posted as they were, they had a decided advantage over the Hussars. The impetuosity, however, and weight of the Life Guards carried all before them, and whilst I exculpate my own regiment, I am delighted in being able to bear testimony to the gallant conduct of the former. Be not uneasy, my brother officers, you had ample opportunity, of which you gallantly availed yourselves, of avenging yourselves on the 18th for the failure on the 17th, and after all, what regiment, or which of us, is certain of success? Be assured that I am proud of being your colonel, and that you possess my utmost confidence. Your sincere friend, Anglesey, Lieutenant General. The 23rd Light Dragoons, supported by the Life Guards, covered our retreat, and we arrived at a position on which was exhibited as noble a display of valor and discipline, as is to be found either in our own military annals, or in those of any other nation. This position was in front of and about 2.5 miles from Waterloo, where most of our army was then drawn up. The French advance guard halted on the heights near La Belle Alliance. When Napoleon said, he wished he had the power of Joshua to stop the sun, that he might attack us that day. They opened a cannonade upon our line, but principally upon our centre behind the farm of La Haye-Sainte. Our guns soon answered them to their cost, and caused great havoc amongst the enemy's columns, as they arrived on the opposite heights between La Belle Alliance and the orchard of La Haye-Sainte. It was now getting dusk, and orders were given to throw out pickets along the front and flanks of the army. Our left squadron, under Captain Werner, was thrown into the valley in front of the left wing, the rest of my regiment bivouacked near where Picton fell the next day. The spirit of mutual defiance was such, that in posting the pickets, there were many little cavalry affairs, which, although of no useful result to either side, were conducted with great bravery, and carried to such a pitch, that restraint was absolutely necessary. Captain Hayliger, of the 7th Hussars, part of our picket, with his troop, made a spirited charge upon the enemy's cavalry, and when the Duke sent to check him, his Grace desired to be made acquainted with the name of the officer who had shown so much gallantry. A better or more gallant officer than Captain Hayliger never drew a sword, but he was truly unfortunate. If there was a bull flying about, he was usually the target. I was 3 times engaged with the enemy, serving with the captain, and he was wounded on each of those occasions, the first time, foraging at Hasparren, next, at the Battle of Waterloo, and thirdly, at Waterloo. The bull he received on the last occasion was extracted at Bruges, in 1831. Our bivouac was dismal in the extreme, what with the thunder, lightning and rain, it was as bad a night as I ever witnessed. A regular soaker, torrents burst forth from the well-charged clouds upon our comfortless bivouac, and the uproar of the elements, during the night preceding Waterloo, seemed as the harbinger of the bloody contest. We cloaked, throwing a part over the saddle, holding by the stirrup leather, to steady us if sleepy. To lie down with water running in streams under us, was not desirable, and to lie amongst the horses not altogether safe. A comrade of mine, Robert Fisher, a tailor by trade, proposed that one of us should go in search of something to sit on. I moved off for that purpose, and obtained 2 bundles of bean stalks from a place that I now know as Mont Street Jean Farm. This put us, I may say, quite in clover. The poor tailor had his thread of life snapped short on the following day. The Duke of Wellington established his headquarters opposite the church at Waterloo, now the post house and post office, while his imperial antagonist, Napoleon, pitched his tent near the farm of Caillou, about 5 miles from Waterloo, on the left of the Genappe road, in the parish of Old Genappe. The imperial baggage was also at this farm. Most of the houses in the villages adjacent to Waterloo were occupied by our generals, their staff, and the superior officers. Their names and rank were chalked on the doors, and legible long after a soldier's death had snatched many of them from the field of their prowess and glory. In the course of the evening the Duke received a dispatch from Blucher, in answer to his letter sent from Quatre Bras, requesting the support of 2 corps of the Prussian army. The officer bearing this dispatch was escorted from Smohan to Waterloo by a party of the First King's German Hussars. Blucher's reply was, "I shall not come with 2 corps only, but with my whole army, upon this condition, that should the French not attack us on the 18th, we shall attack them on the 19th. The Duke therefore accepted battle only under these circumstances, Napoleon's lauded plan of operations enabling His Grace to ultimately place the author of those brilliant conceptions between 2 fires. Blucher appeared most anxious to fight side by side with the Allies and their chief, deeming an Anglo-Prussian army invincible, while Wellington, after having defeated most of Napoleon's best marshals, was no doubt desirous of measuring swords with their mighty master himself, the hero of 100 battles. There is every reason to believe that the Duke was more apprehensive of being turned by Hal on his right, and of Brussels being consequently taken by a coup de main, than about any other part of his position. This fact is confirmed by the following orders, dated Waterloo, 17th of June, 1815. The army retired this day from its position at Quatre Bras, to its present position in front of Waterloo. The brigades of the 4th Division at Braine-le-Comte are to retire at daylight tomorrow morning upon Hal. Major General Colville must be guided by the intelligence he receives of the enemy's movements, in his march to Hal, whether he moves by the direct route, or by Ongon. Prince Frederick of Orange is to occupy with his corps the position between Hal and Ongon, and is to defend it as long as possible. The army will probably continue in its position, in front of Waterloo, tomorrow. Lieutenant Colonel Torrens will inform Lieutenant General Sir Charles Colville of the position and situation of the armies. The field of Waterloo is an open undulating plain, and, on the day of the battle, was covered with splendid crops of rye, wheat, barley, oats, beans, peas, potatoes, tess and clover. Some of these were of great height. There were a few patches of ploughed ground. The field is intersected by 2 high roads which branch off at Mont Street Jean. These are very wide. The one on the right, leading to Nivelles and Binch, since planted with trees, is straight as an arrow for miles. That on the left, lying in the center of both armies, leading south to Genappe, Charleroi, and Namur, is not so straight as the former, about 1,100 yards in advance of the junction, is a gently elevated ridge which formed a good natural military position. Nearly a year before these events, the Duke had written to Lord Bathurst, enclosing a memorandum on the defence of the Netherlands, in which he says, "About Nivelles and between that and Binch, there are many advantageous positions, and the entrance of the Forêt de Soignes, by the high road which leads to Brussels from Binch, Charleroi, and Namur, would, if worked upon, afford others. The great advantage was that the troops could rest in the rear of the crest of the ridge, screened in a great measure from the enemy's artillery and observation, whilst our guns were placed at points, from whence they could sweep, they are wonderful brooms, the slope that descends to the valley in front. Upon the crest is a crossroad running east and west, intersecting the Genappe road at right angles, about 250 yards on this side of the farm of La Haye-Sainte. The crossroad marks the front of the Allied position. Near where the Lion now stands, the crossroad or line runs curving forward a little for about 600 yards, when it first gently and then abruptly falls back into the Nivelles road, near the termination of the ridge, where it takes a sweep to the rear. This point was at first our right centre, but became our right when Lord Hill's troops were brought forward into the front line, between 4 and 5 o'clock p.m. About 450 yards south of this point is the important post of Hougoumont, destined to become so celebrated in the annals of history, and which even now stands a noble monument of the determined valour of both the assailed and assailants. It was then a gentleman's seat, with farm, outbuildings, walled garden, orchard and wood. The latter has been since cleared, in consequence of the injury the trees sustained in the battle. The buildings are more than 200 years old and were erected for defence. Many of the stone loopholes made in the garden walls when first built are still quite perfect, as are also those made by our troops on the spur of the moment. The hedges were all banked up, and with the ditches on the inner side formed excellent breastworks. A ravine or hollow way, called by Colonel Hepburn our friendly hollow way, runs along the northern boundary of the premises, which during the battle frequently served as a covered communication with the walled enclosures and buildings, as also for a rallying point and cover. Hougoumont was formerly the property of Arizola Genappe, who had been Viceroy of Naples. In 1815 it was in the occupation of M. de Luneville, a descendant of the above family. It is now the property of Count Robineau. This post is situated about midway between the positions of the two hostile armies. The chateau, farm, walls, etc., were at the time of the battle of a substantial nature. The garden, or park, was enclosed, on the east and south sides, by a wall, in which our troops made additional loopholes. They also cut down a portion of the buttresses, on the inside of the south wall, for the purpose of erecting a scaffolding which would enable them to fire over the top of the wall, or to bayonet intruders. At the east wall, an embankment, and the scaffolds erected with some farming utensils, enabled the Coldstream to throw such a fire upon the enemy's left flank when in the large orchard, that Colonel Hepburn, who commanded there from about 2 o'clock, considered it, the east wall, as the strength of his position. Loopholes were also made in the stables joining the south gate, and a scaffold was erected against the wall on the west, that ran from the south stables to the barn. The flooring over the south gateway was partly torn up, to enable our men to fire down upon the enemy, should they force the gate which had been blocked up, and was not opened during the action. The little chapel and crucifix still remain, but the numerous autographs of persons visiting the field since 1815 are all destroyed, the walls having been lately fresh plastered. The most interesting objects now at Hougoumont, for visitors to see, are the north gateway facing our position, by which the enemy entered, its burnt beams, the small barn where many of the wounded were burnt, the cannon-ball hole in the east gable of the building attached to the present farmhouse, the well-perforated top part of the south gate, the battered front of the house, stables, and the loopholed walls with the banked-up hedges, hollow way, and some perforated trees in front of the walls. In the garden is a tomb, beneath which lie the remains of Captain Blackman of the Coldstream, brother to Sir George Harnage, who fell on that spot. Hougoumont presents even at this moment a scene of shattered ruins, which cannot be viewed without exciting feelings of the deepest interest. On the troops being thrown into Hougoumont on the 17th, all means were employed to strengthen it as much as possible, and there are still to be seen many of the intended loopholes in an incomplete state, from which it may be inferred that the troops were called off to defend the post, whilst in the act of making them. Hougoumont was first occupied on the afternoon of the 17th by the light companies of the 1st Division of British Guards. The light troops of the 1st Regiment, under Colonel Lord Saltoun, held the orchard and wood. Those of the Coldstream and 3rd Guards, under Colonel MacDonnell, held the buildings and garden. In the outgrounds and wood there were also a battalion of Nassau troops, a company of Hanoverian field riflemen, and 100 men from the Lunenburg battalion. The supernumerary light companies of the Guards were thrown into the valley on our side of the enclosures, as a support, and to keep up communication with the main line. On the east side of the Genappe road, the crossroad was lined by 2 broken banked-up hedges, extending about half a mile, near the termination of which is a knoll, with a bit of copse or brushwood on the rear slope. This mound, or knoll, overlooks the farms of Perpelet, La Haye, Frischemont, and the hamlet of Smohan in the valley. The undulation in the rear of the ridge afforded excellent protection to the second line, cavalry, and reserves, which were quite concealed from the enemy's view. Beyond the right of the main ridge, on the right of the Nivelle road, is a deep valley which runs round Hougoumont in the direction of Meurbrain, and from the valley cutting through the ridge to the Little White Chapel on the Nivelle road, runs a deep ravine, which is the one mentioned by the Duke in his dispatch, and intersects the second ridge or plateau, that was occupied by part of the 2nd Corps, under Lieutenant General Lord Hill, who were to act as a right wing, en potence, or as a reserve, as circumstances might require. The principal part of the troops occupying this plateau and valley belonged to the 2nd British Division under Lieutenant General Sir Henry Clinton. It was composed of the 3rd Light Brigade, Major General F. Adam, the 52nd, Colonel Sir John Colborne, now Lord Seaton, the 71st, Colonel T. Raynall, the 2nd Battalion 59th Rifles, Colonel Norcott, with 2 companies of the 3rd Battalion 95th, under Lieutenant Colonel Ross, who were posted near Meurbrain. The 1st Brigade, King's German Legion, under Colonel Duplat, was composed of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Line battalions. The 3rd Hanoverian Brigade, under Colonel Hugh Halkett, consisted of the militia battalions, Osnabrück, Salzgitter, Bremerveden and Quakenbrück. The Brunswick Corps, after their duke had fallen, were under Colonel Ulferman, also near Meurbrain. Along the Hougoumont Avenue and the road leading from it to Braine-l'Alleud, were some light troops, who, in conjunction with the Hussars posted on their right, had in the morning, before the battle began, a sharp skirmish with the enemy. They were part of the 4th Brigade of the 4th Division, under Colonel Mitchell, and attached to the 2nd Division, composed of the 51st Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Rice, the 15th Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Tidy, and of the 32nd Fusiliers, Colonel Sir H. Ellis. The latter came into front line during the afternoon. On the right of the former was a squadron of the 15th Hussars, under Captain Woodhouse, who threw out vedette and kept a lookout upon our extreme right. Upon the Nivelle Road, opposite the Hougoumont Avenue, was an abattis, or barricade. Near Mitchell's brigade were posted, about 2 o'clock, 2 companies of the Coldstream Guards, with their colours, in reserve. Upon the ridge above and overlooking Hougoumont was posted the 1st Division of British Guards, composed of the 2nd Battalion of the Coldstream Guards, Colonel Woodford, who was a little in advance, the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Guards, Colonel Hepburn, posted a little in the rear of the crest of the ridge. The whole were in battalion columns, with deploying intervals, and in checker. On their left was the 1st Brigade, composed of the 2nd Battalion of the 1st Guards, Colonel Askew, and posted in the rear, and of the 3rd Battalion, Colonel the Honourable W. Stewart, posted a little in advance of the crest. On the left of Maitland was the 3rd Division, under Lieutenant General Count Alton, the 5th British Brigade, composed of the 30th, Colonel Hamilton, and the 73rd, Colonel G. Harris, posted in advance, and of the 33rd, Colonel Elphinstone, with the 69th, Colonel Morris, posted upon the right rear of the 30th and 73rd. The 4 regiments formed and acted as 2. On their left was the 1st Hanoverian Brigade, under Major General Count Kielman-Zedge. The field battalions of Bremen, Verdun, York, Grubenhagen and Lüneburg were posted 3 in front and 2 in the second line. On Kielman-Zedge's left was the 2nd Brigade of the King's German Legion, under Colonel Ompteda, which formed Alton's left and rested upon the Genappe High Road. It was composed of the 1st Light Battalion, Major Buscher, and the 2nd, Colonel Bering, of the 5th Line, Colonel Linsingen, and the 8th, Colonel Schroeder. The 1st and 5th were a little in the rear of the crossroad upon the ridge, the 8th in reserve. The 2nd Light, under Colonel Bering, held La Haye-Sainte, a post far from being so commodious as Hougoumont, but considerably nearer our position, consequently easier of access, although more exposed to the enemy's attacks and cannonade. It was a strong stone and brick building, with a narrow orchard in front, and a small garden in the rear, both of which were hedged round, except the east side of the garden, on which there was a strong wall running along the high road side, then taking a western direction terminated upon the east end of the barn. A large and small gate opened on the road, a yard and barn door led to the orchard and fields which now faced the line. At this point was the chief tug of war. A passage led through the house from the farmyard into the garden, which lies on the north or allied side of the buildings, the door of which was 4 feet wide. There were also on the same side 4 windows and 10 loop or air holes, by which any quantity of ammunition might have been thrown in. Consequently, the oft-told tale that a breach should have been made on that side but was forgotten, falls to the ground, like many other false reports. A dozen loopholes in the west or lion side of the buildings would have added considerably to the strength of the post. Loopholes were made in the south and east walls as well as in the roofs, and the post strengthened on being occupied by our troops. A barricade was thrown across the high road, near the southeast angle of the wall, but there were several drawbacks to the strengthening of this post. The working tools had been lost, the carpenters had been sent to assist at Hougoumont, half of the large west barn door was wanting, and in addition, the post was exposed to a line of batteries that had been pushed forward upon the inner ridge of the French right wing, at a range of from 6 to 800 yards. In the rear of the interval between Halket's and Kielman-Zedge's brigades stood the Nassau Brigade, 3 battalions of the 1st Regiment of Nassau, under General Cruiser. Upon the left of the Genappe Road, in columns just under the crest of the ridge, was the 5th Division, the 8th Brigade, composed of the 28th, Colonel Sir P. Belson, the 32nd, Colonel Hicks, the 79th Highlanders, Colonel Douglas, and of the 1st Battalion 95th Rifles, Colonel Sir A. Barnard. In front of the right of the brigade, and about 140 yards from the crossroad, stood a knoll, in front of which was a sandhole, where the Hanoverian monument now stands. On our side of the knoll and parallel with our front, was a hedge slightly studded with trees, about 140 yards long. The whole of this ground was occupied by 3 companies of riflemen, under Major Leach, who made a barricade across the road. More of the rifles lined the straggling hedge along the crossroad. Their reserve was at the junction of the roads. On their left was the 9th Brigade, consisting of the 1st or Royal Scots, Colonel Campbell, the 42nd Royal Highlanders, Colonel Sir Macara, the 44th, Colonel Hamilton, and the 92nd Highlanders, Colonel Cameron, their left near the brushwood, upon the rear face of the knoll on our left. From this to Wavre, which is concealed by woods and high ground, and from whence the Prussians had to march, the distance is about 12 miles, consequently, the Duke had good reason for calculating on a much earlier support by Blucher. In Pack's left front was the 4th Hanoverian Brigade, under Colonel Best, composed of the militia battalions, Lüneburg, Verdun and Osterode, the Munden in reserve. In Best's left rear, and posted a little under the crest of the ridge, was the 5th Hanoverian Brigade, 5th Division, under Colonel Vink, in columns of battalions, namely, those of Homeln and Hildesheim, Penn and Gifhorn. The hamlet of Smohan, with the farms of Papellet and La Haye, and the houses and enclosures in the valley, were occupied by the 2nd Brigade of the 2nd Dutch-Belgian Division, under General Paponcha. This brigade, under the Duke of Saxe-Weimar, was composed of the 2 battalions of Orange Nassau, and the 2nd and 3rd battalions of the Regiment of Nassau, the 1st battalion of which was at Hougoumont. Upon our extreme left was the 6th Cavalry Brigade, under Major General Sir Hussey Vivian, composed of the 10th Hussars, Colonel Quentin, the 18th Hussars, Colonel the Honourable H. Murray, and of the 1st Hussars of the German Legion, Colonel de Wissel. A picket of the 10th, under Captain Taylor, was thrown into Smohan in the valley. Their vedette were posted on the rising ground beyond. This concludes the second part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more stories and leave a comment.